Melbourne's COVID outbreak has taken a worrying turn, with an aged care worker one of 5 new cases. It's forced a nursing home in the city's northwest into lockdown and raised serious questions about the vaccine rollout. Health officials are now tracing more than 4,000 close contacts. A Tier 1 exposure site has been named at Chadstone Shopping Complex, just as a $250 million business support package was unveiled. Jody Lee begins tonight's coverage.
Vulnerable aged care residents confined to their rooms, staff now wearing full PPE. Our care at Maidstone is in crisis after an aged care worker tested positive to COVID-19.
This aged care positive case is of extreme concern to us. It's our most vulnerable and sensitive setting.
Authorities were notified about the aged care worker's case last night after the woman from Altona developed symptoms and got tested on Friday. Authorities believe she contracted the virus on Wednesday or Thursday, both days she worked at the facility. She wore a mask and was asymptomatic then, and hadn't worked at any other aged care home.
The staff member involved presented immediately for testing as soon as she had symptoms on Friday. That is so important.
The woman had already received the first dose of her COVID vaccine, as have only a third of staff there. 70% of residents at the home have 2. A second round of resident vaccinations was due to take place next week, but it's now been brought forward to tomorrow.
We are encouraging all residents or their families, for those that have not provided consent, to reconsider.
But most troubling for authorities, no clear link between the aged care worker and any known exposure sites or other known cases of the virus.
And this is the first mystery case we've seen in this particular outbreak. That, of course, is a significant concern for us, and we've got everybody focused on trying to identify where that's come from and any other exposure that she may have had.
Of the other 4 new COVID cases recorded overnight, 2 are close contacts of a known case and were already in isolation. A third had visited the Telstra store at South Melbourne, a known exposure site, and was also isolating at home. The 4th was one of their close contacts. There are now more than 4,000 close contacts in isolation for 14 days. So far, 70% of them have returned negative results. There are now more than 170 exposure sites. Among those recently added to the list, Chadstone Shopping Centre, where an infected person roamed the shops and ate in a restaurant on May 26. The Yokozuna restaurant is now a Tier 1 site. Optus, Baker's Delight and Woolworths are Tier 2.
We're really keen to establish anybody else who's been to those premises. We'd like you to get tested and to isolate.
But it can be difficult to know if you've visited an exposure site, the government taking hours, sometimes days, to update its website. In many cases, leaving it to the venue to self-report to customers.
We absolutely encourage venues to use every means possible to get the word out if we've identified them as an exposure site.
Accuracy is everything as case numbers and exposure sites continue to climb.
And Jody Lee has more on when our lockdown could possibly be lifted. Jody, no guarantees it will only be 7 days.
Well, Mitch, the acting Premier says there's no magic number of COVID cases or stretch of COVID-free days that would signal an end to this lockdown or even an extension. He says those decisions are made solely on the recommendations of health officials.
We will get advice from public health when we can ease restrictions on this 7-day circuit breaker lockdown. But I go back to the advice we received just days ago from public health that we needed to go into this circuit breaker lockdown, because if we can't get ahead of this outbreak, then it becomes uncontrollable, and everyone knows what that means.
Mr Molino says this continues to be a day-by-day proposition based on the numbers. Even if lockdown does lift on time, some restrictions are likely to remain. Mitch?
Jody Lee in the city, thank you.